After a hiatus, the IMG Roadmap podcast is back. We are bigger and better than ever before. I want to thank you for listening. I thank you for more than 102,000 downloads. We have listeners on every continent now. I'm so excited. If you love this podcast, do me a favor. Allow me to stay alive by leaving a comment and rating me on Apple, Spotify, or Google Podcasts. Literally wherever you listen to the podcast. Oh, and if you would like to join the cohort of physicians who start residency in 2023 and you are an IMG, then this program is for you. I have my waitlist open currently for the 2022 IMG Roadmap Live program, and you don't want to miss it. So click the link in the show notes. The IMG Roadmap is the only podcast dedicated to coaching international medical graduates in success blueprints for this unique pathway. I am Dr. Nina Loom, your host, a previous IMG turned hospital medicine physician, healthcare administrator, speaker, and coach. I empower, encourage, and equip you with actionable steps that you can take towards the residency position of your dreams. The IMG Roadmap is the only podcast dedicated to coaching international medical graduates in success blueprints for this unique pathway. I am Dr. Nina Loom, your host, a previous IMG turned hospital medicine physician, healthcare administrator, speaker, and coach. I empower, encourage, and equip you with actionable steps that you can take towards the residency position of your dreams. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the IMG Roadmap podcast. Today's guest is near and dear to my heart. And you guys probably hear me say this all the time, but this one is really real. We're going to welcome Dr. Kimbong to the show. Dr. Kimbong is an internist, currently practicing as a hospitalist. And I don't want to spill the tea because everybody that comes on the show is an IMG, obviously, but this one is special. So Dr. Kimbong, welcome to the show. How are you doing tonight?
Hey, thanks, Dr. Loom. I'm glad to be here. I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Just hanging in there, taking it a day at a time.
Nice.
So usually when we come on the show, we like to know a little bit about your background in medicine. Can you tell us some about yourself?
Sure. So just real quick, I was born and raised in Cameroon. I did my medical education back in Cameroon. So got my MD degree from Cameroon and practiced a little bit, not a whole lot, probably 1-2 years. And then eventually came over to the States, did residency in Texas, and I'm here.
Awesome. So what year did you finish medical school in Cameroon?
I finished medical school in Cameroon in 2014.
Okay. And How many years did you practice there for and in what capacity?
So in Cameroon, when you finish with your MD degree, you're pretty much, I'll call it a general physician. So I practiced like a general physician for 2 years. Yeah.
Awesome. And did you already know at that point that you wanted to start working towards the USMLE, or at what point, what was the trigger for you that made you think hey, I should take the USMLE, or what was your planning around that?
So while in med school, there's a couple of seniors who were ahead of me. Every time I talk to them, they always mention the USMLE. I just took a natural liking to it. But when I was in the 6th and 7th year, I think, there's a couple of guys who were actively preparing for the USMLE, and they were really close to me. So I used to talk with them, just actually monitor their journey. And when they were successful, I knew, this is something cool. This is something which is definitely doable. And so when I finished medical school, that's when I kind of picked up material and started preparing.
Right. So it sounds like you had mentors in your educational process that had kind of given a glimpse of what was possible. And so it was easy for you to sort of pick up from where they left, so to speak.
Oh, yeah.
So where did you go to medical school? What was the name of the school?
I went to CUSE. That's the old name. Right now it's Faculty of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences, University of Yaounde I. But it goes popularly by CUSE.
Right. So for those who don't know, if you're listening to the podcast, I'm also from Cameroon, and that's the first medical school in Cameroon in general, but then also it is the oldest and the most reputable medical college we've had for as long as I can remember. So it's actually one of those schools. I have a funny story. I did take the exam for QS, and I'm still offended that I did not get acceptance into QS, but that's a whole other story for another day.
Hey, it worked out.
It did. You probably heard me say this story. Have I ever told you this before?
Oh, yeah. You did tell me.
Many times probably, because it's still a sore spot. It's those kind of things that cause trauma for people.
Hey, everything happens for a reason. Everything happens for a reason. So.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. In many ways, I do agree with that. And we'll segue into that because I feel like even how we met was very much serendipitous in that light. So let's talk about USMLE preparation. Did you start preparing for USMLE back home in Cameroon, or did you start after leaving the country?
I actually prepared for step one in Cameroon because I wrote step one in Africa. I wrote it in Accra in Ghana.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, I prepared for step one. After I graduated from med school in 2014, I started preparing, I want to say sometime around maybe January, February of 2015. And I took it in September of 2015. So a couple of months. So all of the preparation, all of that was done back home. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So I didn't realize that you did step one in Ghana. Like, this is new information to me. And I feel like I've known you for several years now. So this is something that is commonplace, right? Like for Cameroonian doctors or even West African doctors that are interested in taking the USMLE to go to another country to take it. Because I believe right now we don't have a prometric center in Cameroon.
No, we don't.
But where are the other prometric centers then? Like what are some options for African physicians that are looking to transition?
Yeah. So the ones I'm aware of, Ghana is the most popular because it's closest to us. But there's a center in South Africa, I think. I had a friend who wrote there actually. And then I want to say probably somewhere around the northern African countries, probably in Egypt or one of those countries up there, there should be a center. Or probably even in Ethiopia, I believe. Yeah, but don't quote me on that. Ghana and South Africa for sure.
Yeah. Right. I think that's very strategic. If you look at the map too, like to have one south, one west, one east, and one up north. I think that's very strategic if it is indeed as such. I've always heard there's a center in Egypt, but I do know for West African physicians, a lot of them tend to gravitate towards going to Ghana for that exam. So you studied at home, and how was your performance? I mean, do you think that you did really well, even though you had studied for a test that maybe you hadn't taken anything like it beforehand? What was that process like for you?
Well, it was, just like anyone who's taken the steps will tell you, it's pretty intimidating. But I think it's a little bit reassuring when you have people who you really can relate to, because it's one thing reading people's success stories off of the internet, and it's a different thing talking with someone who you've studied with, someone who you really understand their journey. So when I was preparing for it, it was intimidating, it was difficult, but I knew it was doable because I literally saw two guys who were very close to me who literally just did it within a year before me. So I knew, it's something which is totally very doable. So even when it was tough, even when the preparation was getting very tough, and you're like, all right, you just probably need to stick to it. And at the end of the day, you make it. My performance was pretty good, actually. Anyway, for the time, that one, I think I did pretty okay. I had a 240. And back then, that was pretty big. I don't know what's big these days, but I guess 240 is still going to be big even in 2022.
Right, absolutely. So obviously step one has moved into more of a pass-fail format as far as the USMLEs, but step two still has a numerical score. And for many people, I still believe step two will become a new standard. And I agree with you, a 240 score is pretty dang good for USMLE performance, especially given that you studied for this independently, such of independent of having any of what we think is the better environment to study for the USMLE. And I think that I want you to just speak a little bit about what are some things that you think that you did differently? What resources? How did you prepare without necessarily having to be here to perform that well? Because there's a misconception that probably have to be here. You have to have done like a Kaplan Life course or some other life program for so long, and you need to understand the US system to be able to do well on the test. But I mean, what is your take on that kind of a belief system?
Well, I mean, clearly I didn't I didn't take the steps, so I didn't study here in the US. So I don't really know what it entails to study here. But one of the things which was very helpful during my journey was a study partner. So I have a very good and very close friend, Sylvester. We did pretty much the entire process together. And I think it goes a really long way because it's one of those things which there are days which you just feel like giving up and stuff. But when you have someone you're working with, when you're down, he uplifts you and vice versa. So that was really helpful.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree 100%. Community makes a big difference. And you mentioned it even before, that even having people that you could look up to that were in your school that had completed the process and actually came out with good reports, you can look at them and say, the way I talk to myself is usually like, this person doesn't have 10 heads, right? Like if they can do it, I can do it as well. So that's usually my consolation, but it's also one of the reasons that gives me hope and it helps me work hard, because it's one thing to look at or have the support of a community or study partner, but then you're not mirroring what they're doing or you're not as effective or efficient in what you're doing, because then the other person goes ahead and leaves you behind. So it's not always like study partner is just going to change the game. For those listening, it's also about, hey, when you work with people and you study with people, are you learning from them? Are you both being competitive in a good way, like helping each other grow and move forward? Are you gaining anything from that relationship, whether it's a mentor-mentee relationship or been a colleague or a senior at school or somebody that's going through the process with you just by virtue of being at the same level of education? So I think that's a good tip for everybody listening, is to find a community that can support you through the journey, simply because it's very difficult, it's very challenging, it's very intimidating in many ways. And it doesn't help that there's a lot of negative press around the whole process too, that just makes it really even more intimidating. So let's talk a little bit, let's pivot now into, we now know that you did all this work from afar and then transitioned to the US. What was your application cycle like? Do you remember like how much you put into it? How many programs you applied? What are some things that you did maybe that you think was beneficial for your application?
Yeah, that's a good question. First off, I think I always say my application was a little bit rushed because I was doing like a zillion things at the same time. And I really didn't have like most candidates who apply, they have like a good number of months, probably 6 months, like they've done the steps, and then they have all this time, maybe they're shadowing and things like that and preparing the application and all that. I really didn't have that luxury. I came to the US, I want to say, because I literally came to the US on the back of completing my MPH program. So I came in and I had 2 months, and I had 2 months to figure everything out. The good thing, I'd already taken all of my steps. So that was good. But I didn't have like letters of recommendations and everything else. Even a personal statement, I haven't even started writing that because I was very focused on other things. So it was rough. But one of the big things, really, after taking the steps, I would say the steps are really important if you haven't taken the steps. But after taking the steps, I mean, of course, obviously, you can't do anything about the scores no more at that time. What comes in even bigger at that time is networking. Networking is huge. So when I got into the US, I mean, you were one of the first people I spoke with. Of course, there's Dr. Enake as well. And you guys just made the whole difference because I didn't know where I was going to get recommendation letters from. And I didn't even know how I was going to proceed. So it was just like asking people left, right, and center. Because to me, prior to even coming to the US, all I was focused on was just like, oh, let me nail the boards. Let me get the best scores I can get. And I thought that was all about it until I got here. And then I realized it was a whole different ball game. Like that's literally just the first part. And then you have this whole other work you have to put in. So it was pretty intense. I would say that.
Yeah. I agree with you in the sense the scores and the boards are great. But I think what people don't realize is that's just like the tip of the iceberg. It's like the scores just open up the doors to say, hey, you're okay to actually apply, right?
Right.
But are you really going to get attention when you apply is the question, because you're with a pool of applicants and there are so many other great applicants with great scores just like you.
Oh, yeah. Way better. Way better. When you start going on interview trails, you realize like maybe you were going in there thinking, oh, you're the big dog. And then you hear a couple of people talking, you're like, oh my, geez. It's really intimidating. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so then you realize that there are other things that make a difference and can make a difference. And I like that you mentioned networking, because I think that's a hugely underutilized tool, especially for those of us that come in as non-US IMGs. Because for one, we don't realize the power of networking. I mean, we do know about it because even in the society that we're raised in, our culture, it's part of that. But we don't realize that it has the same weight, if not more, because career in the US is just like any other career. And networking is still the number one way that people get leads, people get jobs, people get opportunities, contracts, and whatnot. And it's not different in medicine. But for some reason, whether it's cultural shyness or just lack of knowledge, we're unlikely to realize the power of that and to really prioritize that so we can put our face forward and move forward. And we think, oh, I'm going to have a great score and that's going to like change the game. When indeed, yes, it will change the game, but that's just like your attention grabber. It's a thing on paper that says, oh, well, this person can apply into a program, but then what else do they bring to the table?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say one other thing too is, as far as just like exposure, I think when it comes to networking, the people who are coming to the US for the very first time are kind of overwhelmed by everything. It's a huge cultural shock. Like everything is new. There's a lot of things which you're not used to. So it helps if you've been in if you've lived abroad before, it goes a long way to help. So that's one of the things. So I totally understand people who come in and, they have good scores and they're just not sure how to go about networking. And I can easily see that. But prior to me coming here, I lived in Europe. That's where I did my master's in public health. So it's kind of a similar setting. It's very different in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of similarities still.
Right. Yeah. I think the concept of networking is universal. But I think when it comes to medicine, sometimes we don't realize that it has the same power or the same influence, just like it does in the business world. Yeah. And so we just neglect that. And I think also is by the virtue of medicine. Medicine is a profession that attracts people who are typically book smart. And so, we think we deserve things based on merit. And if I do well on my boards, it should equate to I get a position. But it's not always the case, especially given several circumstances, whether it's being an IMG or requiring visa sponsorship and just other limiting factors that we will not get into at this point, but there are so many of them. And definitely, I think networking is a tool that can be greatly, greatly utilized. And that's one of the things I teach all. I'm just like, hey, there's a method, there's a system to networking, and you have to master it. Otherwise, you're just going to be dealing at a disadvantage. And it doesn't end with getting into residency. It continues on for like literally the rest of your career. Oh, yeah. Because right now, finishing up a fellowship and I'm starting to look at jobs. And the first place I got an offer from is a place that my current chair at the emergency department here at UT called somebody up and says, hey, I have somebody. And that's the first person calling me back and giving me really great offers and options to pick from. Nice. I have not sent in an application yet. So it's just based on my relationship with the chair of the department that I can just be recommended to this other place. And I haven't applied for it. Right. So networking goes beyond just trying to get a residency spot. Yes, at the moment, that's what it's about. But then you realize as you progress in your career, it just becomes like the number one thing that keeps opening up doors. And I think in essence, it's almost like, it almost maybe even shows the relationship that we have with humans. Like no man is an island. Like we need one another to move forward.
For sure. 100%. Yeah.
So I think a lot of people don't realize this, but in speaking, we're both non-US IMG. So we both had visas, or at least I can say had in the past tense, but we both had visas for training. And you currently work now at the facility where I did my J1 visa. Yeah. And what people don't realize is like going through this whole process, residency is like one thing. And I think it's not the most difficult thing. And it's probably the thing that I think matters the most, because even the J1 work to me is not, it's a piece of cake if you ask me, right?
Oh yeah.
It's a piece of cake.
Training is hard. Working is easy because you're already trained for it. Yeah.
Exactly. So training is I like that. Training is hard, working is easy. So tell us a little bit about that transition for you from residency into work as a J1 physician.
So first off, the whole waiver thing, switching, like transitioning from one visa type to another, it's a little bit of a hassle, but it's fairly standardized. So it's one of those things you really don't have to worry about it until you get there. You talk to a couple of people who have done it, and it's pretty straightforward. Most of those things are done by your attorneys anyway. So it's not like you're really doing anything much.
So what would you tell somebody that's freaking out about that? Because I get a lot of emails from applicants they haven't even started residency yet, or they know they'll need a J1 and they're already freaking out about it. Yesterday, case in point, I had someone in my DMs on Instagram asking me if they took a J1 position, if they were going to get the same compensation as a non-J1 person, or like someone in the same job, or if J1s are compensated lower because they're J1s. And in my head, I just thought, oh my God, what is the perverse word that's going out there that makes people feel like J1 jobs are just actually have to be the worst? Yes, they have to be in a medical and service area or in a facility that has that requirement, but that's for the government. Right. But once it comes to your compensation and the work that you do, it's not any different from...
No, absolutely no difference. The contracts we have, there's a lot of US citizens working where I work right now. So it's not like I have a different contract from what they have.
Yeah.
No. The process, I'd say the J1 waiver thing, this really true. When you're job hunting, it's a little bit tricky, but there's a couple of things which you have to take into consideration, like knowing where to look for jobs and knowing what states to prioritize over others and stuff like that. But those are things which are very easy to tell. Once you get there, you will know what to do. So there's really no need to stress a whole lot about it. There's a lot of jobs, that's for sure, in different places. So if you probably say want to be in the West Coast versus the East Coast or in the Midwest, there's always a lot of opportunities. So there's really nothing to stress about.
I agree 100%, but I think it's just sometimes, and maybe I'm being a little bit ruthless about this topic because it's been many years since I felt that anxiety. And so I'm a little bit far removed from it. But I can remember looking for jobs, but I don't know. I felt like there were so many jobs. I had more interviews than I could attend, if that makes any sense. Well, so when it came to time for looking at jobs,
but
then again, it was a couple of years ago, like not dating myself.
COVID back then.
Yeah, it was 2014.
It's a little bit different, but still there's a lot of jobs.
Yeah. So I remember I had to cancel some interviews when I got the offer at the facility that you're at now. I was just like, I'm not going to any other interviews. And I'm like, I'm fine. I'm going to take this one, make it work. It's exactly what I wanted. Hospitalist, 7 on, 7 off, good hourly pay. And it was just like good benefits, moving on. And more importantly, they were going to sponsor my green card. So to me, that was like my ultimate number one. And then most things kind of fell after that. So if another IMG is listening to this podcast today and they're grasping at stuff, they're like, Dr. Kimbong can sit over here and sounds like he's well accomplished and has done all these great things. He's living his good life right now. What's in it for me, right? So they're asking, what are some pearls that they can take home with them today based on what you have experienced and the process that you've been through so far?
Yeah. All right. So I'd say this, if you're thinking about starting like the whole process, like from scratch, you haven't taken your boards, so I'd say go for those boards, like attack them like your life depended on it. So go for go get the best scores you can potentially get. Once you're done with that, you forget about that. Now it's on to networking. You network your success depended all on networking. And if you can do just those two, I think you'll be fine. Most people, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. Because if you get good scores and you know how to network very well, you definitely get a bunch of interviews. And now when you have those interviews, that's a whole different conversation. You need to prepare well for your interviews. And you get 3, 4, 5 interviews. I don't see why you shouldn't match.
Absolutely. I agree. I think you don't need a whole lot really to match, because once, in my opinion, if you do well on 1 or 2 interviews, you can definitely still secure yourself a match, because it all depends on how you interview. And then there's so many other factors too, because once you get to interview stage, I mean, they like what they see on paper. You just have to convince them that you're the one for the job. And so I definitely agree with that. And what other tips do you have for people who are worried about training on a J1 visa or have reservations about it? And that's something that's maybe holding them back. It's like they're thinking, well, I have to do an underserved requirement. As somebody that's actively doing that, what are your thoughts so far?
I'd say it's not as bad as a lot of people make it sound. Because honestly, I mean, the US is the US. Irrespective of where you work, you can do pretty much anything you want. This is my week off. If I wanted to go to the beach in Miami right now, I could do it. There's really nothing holding me back. You see what I'm saying? So you have that, the fact that, and your work schedule is really good. You're working 7 days straight and then you're off 7 days. So if you're off for 7 days, even if you worked in say in Montana or Wyoming, you can always get out of there when you're off and go catch fun or do whatever it's really important to you. So it's really not a big deal. It's really not as bad as people make it sound.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just not as bad as people make it sound. And the fear is actually more crippling than the work itself. And that's unfortunate, because there's just tons of opportunity out here waiting to be tapped. And what people actually don't realize is the short-term benefit of a J1 job. So yeah, there are some repercussions with it. Maybe if you have to go to a distant area, but you have access. This is America. You have access to airports. You have access to fly anywhere you want to go. You have, and potentially you have the finances to do it with a lot more ease than the person whose cost of living is astronomically high because they live in the middle of Manhattan, right?
Right.
So, you know, your dollar can go a whole lot longer and it can do a whole lot more for you than maybe the person whose overhead is way more than what they bring home. So I think there's just some subtle advantages that it takes a person that's actually thinking through things rationally, as opposed to someone that's just feeding off of the fear mongering or internet trolls or whatnot. Yeah. So, well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I enjoyed having this conversation with you. I know that in listening, someone else has taken a lesson or two that they can apply into their life and their IMG journey. We wish you the very best. Do you have any future plans that you want to share with us? What are you looking at career-wise? Any moves coming up? Anything you want to bring us in on?
Yeah, for sure. So potentially I might be coming to a city near any one of you guys for fellowship. I know I told you this when I was still interviewing, I was gonna go for a fellowship. Yeah, just along the line, life happens, things change, situation changes, and you have to make certain adjustments. But when I'm done with my waiver, my plan really is to go back into fellowship, potentially cardiology, and knock it out, and then we'll see what happens afterwards.
Right. And I would recommend strongly that you buddy up with, what's his name, Dr. Abe. He is definitely a great mentor to have. He works at the same hospital that we were at. Yeah. And I think he did the same thing. He came to London, worked for a few years, went and did his, fellowship, and then came back and went and did his EP thing again. He did that back and forth. And now he's the only EP guy in that area. Yeah. So definitely somebody that I would buddy up with and try to get in as a mentor along those lines for sure, because he definitely knows people in the cardiology world. So thanks for sharing your dreams and aspirations with us. We wish you the very best. And if an IMG wanted to reach out to you and they wanted to connect with you, what platforms can they connect with you on? Or are you on social media, or are you more of an email guy, or how does that work?
I'm on social media, but I'm really not active in social. I'm I'm really, really dormant on social media. But yeah, people can reach out to me on Facebook. A lot of people have been doing that already. During this last application cycle, a bunch of people I was writing recommendation letters for people who have never saw them. But it's just one way to help, right? Yeah. So, but people definitely they can find me on Facebook. Yeah.
Awesome. So we'll have your information on Facebook then. All right. Very well. Thanks for having us today. And we appreciate you sharing your time and expertise with us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Loom. Thanks for having me.